Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delay. Let's go ahead and get started. It's 12:06. It is the contract subcommittee meeting for the DHSS Reorganization Committee meeting. I'm Carolyn Petrak. I am the Associate Executive Director of the Ability Network of Delaware and chair of this subcommittee meeting. I am joined by my co-chair, Representative Krista Griffith. Thank you guys all for coming. The first thing I want to go ahead and do is approve the minutes from the January 29th meeting. You should have received it in your within the last couple of days. If you can go ahead and take a moment to look it over if you haven't already, and let us know if you have any comments or edits that we need to know about.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Anybody opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. Okay. So then let's go ahead. I'm going to hand this over to Michelle, who has joined us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Just so that everybody is aware, we got the department's response this morning. I haven't had a chance to even open the document because I've been on calls all morning. So I don't want to necessarily dive into it too deep, but I'd certainly welcome a report from Michelle on anything she has to share on any new information, or in general, the response to the department's response to our information request.
Thank you. So we were able to respond to most of the questions that were sent along. We are going to need a little bit of extra time to go through some of the new questions that were sent earlier this week for the DSAM pieces, just to make sure that we can answer them completely and address the questions that are out there. So that is the one piece we were not able to do. Everything else that we were
Michelle,
able to
I'm sorry to interrupt real quick. I'm having a little, I don't know if others are too, just a little bit of hard time hearing. We can hear you well. It's just, it's not as, I don't know if maybe there's where you are, or if you could come up a little closer, maybe.
I'll try that. It might just be my internet connection, but I apologize for the close up. So, is that better? Okay. So we were able to respond to everything except some of the new questions that came along related to some of the contracts and very specific contract questions. So we do need a little bit of extra time for those. Otherwise, we were able to provide some updates where they were requested about some of the spending and invoicing benchmarks. And I'm not sure how far into the weeds that you really want to go into the requests for information, or just as it comes up in the conversation. So I'll really defer to the committee for that, unless you want me to walk through, summaries of each response.
I'll let I'd leave that question open to my co-chair and the committee members. I'm actually interested in knowing what you think the timeline is on the remainder of the responses as we try to, push forward and expect to meet again and have enough information that from the response from you all to be able to make an well-informed, craft our recommendations and be well-informed in that.
March 1st.
March 1st. So anything remaining by March 1st.
That is the goal. And if we cannot meet that for whatever reason, I'll try to be very, very transparent for that.
Okay. The only thing I'd say, Michelle, is if we get to the end of this meeting, we schedule the next meeting, and is if you're not able to meet that March 1st deadline, that we have enough time so that we can either make any necessary changes to the meeting, or we have time to then plan the agenda for that meeting appropriately
Yep.
Just to be respectful of everybody else's time.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think in use to other than these responses, I think Carolyn, and again, I don't have the agenda right in front of me. I do have because I'm looking at the responses right now. But our focus today was going to be on these responses. Is that right? And so I think it would be a good use of our time to spend a little bit going, take understanding, of course, that our committee members haven't had an opportunity yet to review the responses, but it might be a good use of time to maybe even just go over a high level review of what the responses are, and knowing, of course, that we'll use the next meeting to take that deeper dive. But if Michelle, if you don't mind, and I have them now, and I think Alexa's going to send them out. But let's start with some of the questions and discuss them, if that's okay with you. I'm looking at, I think question one's a good question to sort of start with, which was, question one was, what percentage of contracts with service providers are not going through the regular RFP route and why? And then Michelle, why don't you go through your response, which discusses bonfire, and I think that's a helpful education, to educate us a little bit about what's happening with the process now.
If I may
Sure.
just quickly jump in, would you like me to share my screen at this time with those responses for everybody to have a visual?
My personal preference on that screen sharing, it can be distracting and hard to read. I don't know, maybe we could do a show of hands from the committee members. Let's see who would like a screen share or just wants to read them letter. I always find those screen shares kind of a little bit distracting, but I don't know. Carolyn, what do you think? What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of text and then everybody's screen is split in two. I don't know that if you're looking at the document with the questions, Krista, and we, go through them, I think that that's more helpful than trying to read tiny little font on a half of the screen.
No problem.
I agree. I think screen sharing is less than ideal. I'll say that in a polite way. Is there a way to email them to us so we could pop them open?
Yes, Alexa,
Yes.
can you email them?
Alexa was going to say that.
Okay, so those will be emailed while we begin the discussion. So Michelle, is that comfortable for you? Do you mind if we start with question number one, and then just review the response, and then we'll see at the moment what kind of questions others might have. Does that work for you? Michelle might be frozen.
Is today the 13th? Okay. Krista?
Let's give Michelle a minute. There she is. Here she is. Hi, Michelle. It's okay. You're on mute.
Yep.
There we go.
Everything froze and I closed myself out. So, but
No, you're fine. It's fine. Some kids are home today. Mine are because of snow. It's just, we're just going to do the best we can. So what we're going to do is your responses to the questions are being emailed right now. We're not going to do a screen share because of some distraction that causes. But we just thought we would just start with the questions, which the first one was related to the RFP process and contracts. And your response, if you could just go over your response to that and explain bonfire, if that works for you.
Sure. So I think one thing that is actually one of our challenges is we don't have a specific service provider, I mean, we view it as a very specific category of provider. It's, those contracts where the vendor is providing direct services to clients. There's really no delineation in any of our systems to differentiate that from like the standard, I'm procuring a different kind of service that's a little bit more of a professional services such as a consultant or IT services or maintenance on an IT system. They're all contracts. So I did have stats for this first question, but I don't have them with me right now. I apologize. But there was also a follow-up about the $50,000 threshold. And looking at how we're viewing things through contracts. And basically, as Bonfire went live, that was April 2020. All contracts should be going through this system, and that's really our goal, is that regardless of if it's an RFP or a renewal or, you know, something that is not going through that process, that should be in Bonfire. It is our goal to get all the contracts through this. However, we're 10 months in, and we're really just, you know, evaluating how do we make sure that that happens. And so with that, the data will be there. At this point, I don't have full data. The other question was about contracts that are less than $50,000 because they don't have to go through procurement processes. And I do want to say that, you know, not separating, if we have contracts of that value, it should be aligned with the scope of service, which is a smaller scope of service, and, you know, the dollar amount, both. You can't piggyback the same scope of service for the same vendor on different contracts. Like, it shouldn't work that way. That is violations of, you know, state procurement law, and it's also violations of accounting stuff. So you know, really, like, that is a practice that the department discourages, that it shouldn't be happening. And again, like with having the standardization of everything through Bonfire, that'll really help us avoid that happening in the future, if it's happening now, which I don't believe it is.
I have a question related to Bonfire, just for, and I know we've discussed this before, but again, I sometimes my brain, it takes 3 times to hear it to sinks in. Bonfire, if you could just walk us through, Bonfire is a software program, is that correct? And that is designed to track every contract that the department handles? Or tell us what Bonfire, if you can give a brief explanation of Bonfire, I think that will help. It'll help me anyway. Other people are probably more familiar than me, but I appreciate that.
Absolutely, that's a great question, and I apologize, I should have started there. Bonfire is an online software that we initially, you know, purchased a subscription to do online procurements. And so to work through that RFP, the request for proposal, and the RFI process in order to have everything posted, have all the documentation posted, but then also allow the information to come back electronically. And with this timing to the beginning of the pandemic, that has been vital to not, you know, have much fewer paper handoffs. Prior to that, everything was in triplicate. You had to do a lot of things in person. It allows for questions to be submitted online. And also it allows for that review process. Once it's over in DHSS's control, all of that feedback loop happens in the software. So really, that's what we were purchasing it for. What we have found is that it can also replace what our old contract management system, which was really just a tracking system called CATS. And we don't have to use that anymore either, as things have to be uploaded. That includes things like an MOU, which would not be procured because it's an agreement with another state agency. It also includes, you know, if I'm on year 2 of a 5-year contract, that renewal can go through there. So all of that is, we're working out that process to be able to have that data in a centralized, you know, way of managing everything. But we're really only 10 months into that process. So, you know, we're at that point of, let's look at the data and get internal feedback for ourselves as well to figure out what process and how we work. But the big thing that Bonfire was there for was to help streamline and to bring the procurement process to be electronic and easier to reach.
Michelle, I have a question and a comment. Our comment first was, we've used Bonfire for, I think, 2 of the RFPs at Easter Seals, and it has gone very, very well. It is much easier to sort of upload those necessary documents than to create and burn CDs and get them, you know, and put together whatever. It was very positive experience. So I just wanted to give you that feedback. It went well. The second is a question I have. Given the current life cycle of contracts under DHSS, do you have an estimated timeline of when you would expect the majority of contracts to actually be into that system to be able to pull data that reflects sort of the majority? I mean,
I'll have to get back to you on that question.
okay.
Any other feedback or questions for Michelle on the bonfire system, how it works? If any of your agencies have used it, Pam, that's helpful feedback. Or if you want to be using it, Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew Henderson from Horizon House. We have submitted 2 proposals through Bonfire, and though I could see some additional changes to it, I think it does make the entire process a lot better, a lot easier. We don't have to make 10 copies. We don't have to burn stuff to disk. I don't have to run down to the Holloway campus at the last minute to drop it off. I don't have to worry about getting some kind of receipt that acknowledges that I dropped it off. So in a lot of ways, it is really beneficial from the person who, the provider who's submitting a proposal. I would be interested in seeing what kind of, like, I guess as it develops, what kind of historical data Bonfire will be able to tell us. Proposals that went out. I know in searching through the system, I've seen some of this, but probably not nearly enough. But how many proposals have gone out? How many were awarded? And I don't know if it said who they were awarded to or just the number that were awarded. So I thought it was interesting, and I do like it. I do find it easier.
And along those same lines, just a question about what the rollout looks like. We have not applied for anything through Bonfire, but we do have existing contracts that are in renewal. So will those renewals, is that how you're going to start to populate the system? As renewals happen, then they'll go through Bonfire and you'll kind of build your portfolio that way?
When it comes to RFPs, yes. So if you're in like year 2 of a 5-year contract that was RFP'd, trying to remember what year it is, in 2019, then when that renewal cycle comes up. So,
So not in the sort of intervening periods, not till it goes back to bid.
The amendment, if we're doing like a 1-year amendment, may go through, just so that way we assign it a contract number for tracking purposes at DHSS. And that's where, we're working through integrating that into our process. But for the RFPs, all new RFPs at DHSS are going through Bonfire. They are still listed on the state's webpage under GSS, Government Support Services, for those who don't speak, in the acronym world I'm in. But, so that it is done in concert with that. But all of the new RFPs will be working through there. So again, that online process, as folks have mentioned, is now the way we're working.
So we actually did a contract amendment. That was one of our submissions, was a contract amendment for a year. It's the 2nd year in. So that worked well. When you say all new RFPs, does that mean when we talk about those contracts that are under that $50,000 threshold, they will not be tracked on Bonfire? Because there's no RFP process associated with it?
Again, that's the process we're looking at how getting everything, even if it's not RFP'd through there.
Okay.
That's really the goal at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or feedback relative to this question? Again, we understand that there's going to be more, you'll have some more time to look at the response and come up with questions for a later meeting. But just for now, before we move on to question 2, anything further on this one? Okay, Michelle, we're going to go to question, the second question related to contracts. The question was, what is the approach contract managers use to negotiate overhead rate? Why are their agencies getting less than 10% indirect costs when policy is 10 to 15%?
So we did survey the divisions, and without going into too much detail, this is one area where we do need to look for additional standardization. There really isn't something that we have as part of an overall guidance that hasn't been updated or looked at, there was some historical metrics. And usually, we hear that 10 to 15% range is very consistent. But I wasn't able to, I think that it is something that as we have changed as a department and in the divisions, we need to look at that again.
Thank you, Michelle. Comments and feedback on that response?
I think that,
Oh, go ahead. Thanks, Carolyn. I was just
Yeah.
thinking it might be helpful to use the opportunity to explain why this is an issue. I mean,
yeah, as providers, as the department works to keep continuously looking at reimbursement rates and the sheer number of contracts that are out there that the department has to deal with, the uniformity of overhead so that providers know how to respond to RFPs or respond to, to build contracts and build their budgets. They need to be able to rely on that base overhead rate, and not have to sort of scramble to make up the difference. So I while I would much rather hear from the actual providers about this, I think that's one of the reasons why it was so important. I have a question about how the department plans moving forward to achieve that sort of uniformity, or oversight within division to division. And I know I've heard that from department leadership that sort of working as one is a primary goal of the department. And I appreciate that, but I don't know if any of the providers on the call, as far as the issues with overhead, if you have any questions on that. I'm going to think I can think of people that do. I don't know if anyone's willing to or has the energy. There you go, Lynn. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm having technical difficulties, so no camera. But so I don't know. I think the question becomes is how people end up defining indirect, and we need to be really careful about that. I'll give you an example with the rate study. They were talking about rent and utilities, that they are an admin cost, and for a nonprofit, all your staff who are sitting inside your building who are working on a program, it's actually a program cost, right? So I like you, Carolyn, would have a lot more questions about how it's going to get created, what thought process will go into that, and that, and where they might consider, what's the industry standard, making sure that we're using benchmarks to identify, what's a reasonable indirect rate, and what's allowed to be included in that. Because the federal government, some of us have to do indirect rates for the federal government. So could we use those? That's kind of what runs through my head when we're talking about this.
And I'll just piggyback on that, Lynn. The issue that we've run into is that we do have federally negotiated indirect rate, but we'll get capped below that rate. And from my perspective, if the feds have done the analysis, the feds have a very exhaustive indirect rate setting process, that being held below that number, which has gone through this really significant vetting, is always problematic, because we know what the cost is. Indirect cost is the indirect cost, right? And so then to have to accept a lower rate, we're always going to be making up that gap.
Good point.
So then, without, Michelle, obviously understanding that you don't have the answer, I think one of the responding questions will be, I think we would like the department to start thinking about what the plan is on addressing this, and creating that the department reflects what the federal government has already set, the standard that already set. But again, complicated, not expecting necessarily additional information, but it's something I think as a committee, we will probably want to discuss.
Okay, the next question is regarding to what circumstances would cause the divisions to delay payment beyond the provider not submitting an invoice. And there's an additional point that was raised. It was last year, we received a point in time analysis by business unit indicating the average length of time it took the department to pay invoices. Please provide an updated document with this information at the beginning of FY21 through today, as well as annual average for the fiscal years 18, 19, and 20. So Michelle, could you, this is a long answer, the detailed answer. So if everyone has their document that we understand, just sent out to look through that as Michelle's speaking, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So I'll start with that first question, and it really has to do with like why there's such a huge variance, and a lot of it comes down to the complexity of invoices. You know, to track an invoice for a direct service versus an IT program versus our staples order, our supply order, they're all called invoices at the same. So there is some of that variance. It really does depend on the complexity of what is coming into division to division. So I'll start there. Internal processes, there's an internal approval process where when the invoice comes in, you need someone on the program side to approve it. And then it will go through the financial side where there is someone who enters it, and then as well as multiple approvers, both internal and external down at the Division of Accounting and Office of Management and Budget. So that's one piece. Sometimes it just comes down to making sure all of our documentation is aligned, that you have an invoice linked to a purchase order, linked to a contract number. And if something is not set up correctly on the front end, especially on that purchase order, or if there's insufficient funding, or there's something just wrong on that was manually keyed, those can be challenges. A lot of it, though, comes down to ensuring that both on the program, financial, and just general operational challenges being that, is there appropriate documentation that the services have been received? Is it in line with what's in the contract? Are we meeting our reporting requirements or any performance measures that may be required for monthly submitting? If the invoice goes to the incorrect mailbox or to the incorrect person. Unfortunately, it's a very large department. This one's more, I think the last bullet is more specific to like technology, but it would be, sometimes we have clauses in our contracts that will say, okay, deliverable received, and then it has internal reviews, sometimes even federally, before the invoice can be paid. Of course, failure to communicate. And if there's disputed information, such as hours or rates or the services or something like that, that may just hold things up. So that's kind of the box of the reasons of why something may come in, but not be okayed for payment right away. When it comes down to current time to process invoices, we're usually looking about 10 to 40 days. There's some outliers at the same time, either direction really. And then it kind of comes back to that, what is the current processing? Of like, what is the division processing versus some of their colleagues that have, much more of a manual process to confirm the services. The goal is within 10 to 30 days post, invoice. So I won't go into like the individual rows, but that is really where we are as of today. And so that's kind of the really detailed summary about spending.
Looking at the numbers, they do look improved, I think, from the report we got a year ago. Obviously, the outlier there is DSAM still, and I know they've been trying to nip that, shave that down, but it still seems to be persisting. And I don't know that any industry is necessarily less dependent on like flush with cash at this moment. Certainly we wouldn't be here if that was the truth. But particularly that outlier is concerning, especially since we've had multiple providers close in the last year, multiple DCM providers close in the last year, particularly because of financial reasons. So, I'm stating the obvious for obvious sake, but I don't know if anybody else has any particular comments or questions on that. I think it obviously is right there. But it bears repeating that is of I think considerable concern to this committee.
I'd like to present, and I'm going to couch this with, it is historic information because this past year was sort of that anomaly of payment. And one of the reasons this came up as a question originally is historically for service delivery and payment, we would see a gap annually right after the budget was approved. So the month of July and August, typically, and the response is, well, we have to upload the new budget and it's not in the system. That timeline could go as long as 4 months before payment was received. That was the longest that we had gone without payment receipt after providing services in the month of June or in the month of July. So I'm hopeful that stays historic data and doesn't repeat, but I feel like you should be aware, Michelle, since that may not be on your radar from before. What is recognizing the budget has to be loaded every new fiscal year, state fiscal year. What is the benchmark that you would like to see that payments start after July services are delivered?
I can definitely give you some of that feedback about that cycle, and I'm sure you've heard parts of this before. But my former role was our budget manager, so I have that cycle ingrained. So the financial system does actually get shut down for about 10 days. So after that, then the budgets are loaded, but we have to set up our current year POs, the purchase orders. So that's probably where some of that catch up is happening, in that, we have to pay for June services, but that may not happen until some point in July, in late July at that. And then usually you've got until about July 20th, give or take a few days. Every year it's slightly different to get those purchase orders set up. If something goes awry, that can be part of that delay and that challenge. However, it really shouldn't be a significant change in impact. And, and if that persists, feel free to reach out.
Okay. The next question, I think, on our list actually had been answered in the prior round. So we're going to move on to what is listed on, let me make sure I'm right, but I think it's question 5. How many contracts does DHSS currently have that utilize external consultants to provide training to either department staff or contract required training to service providers?
To give a little historical background for the record, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason that request was put in was the department and in individual divisions used to have a lot more training staff and conducted the trainings. They have professionals within the department, and I think that was phased out, thus utilizing contractors more. So I think we were looking to see, again, going back to looking at the trends of the increase in contracts related to training, whereas previously it was done in-house, versus having to contract out to more consultants. One, increasing your your sheer volume of contracts, and to the expense of utilizing similar trainers or state staff, and versus having to go out of the state.
So this one there's about 22 contracts right now that either contract for training services or to our staff or to providers. That's kind of what we ended up. It was across several different divisions, primarily the service ones. And I didn't have the time to really break that out into any further detail.
Any committee members want to add to this question, or, talk about it? Or do you prefer to wait? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to, looks like question 6, Michelle, and correct me if I'm wrong. So this is a 5-year look back by fiscal year on DHS spending on all consultant contracts. I think probably this is one where everyone's going to want to spend some time on before we discuss. I mean, 5-year look back on contracts. So let's everyone digest that for the next meeting, and look at it. And honestly, if you have questions that arise while you're looking through this document, you don't necessarily have to wait till their next meeting to ask those questions. If it helps to get the data ready for our next meeting, please send those questions to Carolyn and I, and Taylor and Alexa, and we'll make sure we can get them to DHSS for further response if needed. Okay, so we'll save that one for the next meeting. The second is also a 5-year look back regarding direct service providers. So again, I think this is another one that everyone's going to want to take a really good look at and talk about later. All right, moving on, we have a strategic, and Carolyn, stop me if I jump over anything. What the document is, it's a big document that contains questions that we began asking the department months and months ago. Some of those questions had been answered right away, and some we were waiting information. So I'm skipping over the questions that all of us have had for some time with responses to go to ones that have recent information. And by recent, I mean this morning. So there's some DSAM question. There's a DSAM question. So I'm in the DSAM section. Question 2 on DSAM says, how many federal dollars has the department received since FY 2018 to address the opioid epidemic and substance use disorders? Looks like we have some updated information on that. Michelle, do you want to review that?
Sure. At this point, the update was just to the DSAM opioid funds. So, I mean, it's about $69 million since FY18, with between 25 and $30 million coming in each of the last 3 years.
Carolyn, is there any?
I mean, I think that's some of the kind of things we need to digest, and the following question, like, again, I'm just looking at this, so I don't know. I apologize if it's, yeah, it's hard to ask additional questions if I can't relate it to the rest of the questions and what's there and what we're waiting on for March.
Sure, and Michelle has let us know that they will be responding with additional information by March 1st to a number of questions relative to DSAM. So I think what we'll do is I'm going to skip through those, and please someone jump in if you want me.
Yeah, if any of the other members have any comments or questions on it just off the top of their head, go ahead and jump in, but without having seen it, I think we can keep going.
Okay, so where that brings me to, again, I'm gonna reiterate, anything that I jumped over that I didn't include, know that we'll have another opportunity to ask further questions at our next meeting. I'm going to jump down to new questions that were asked of the department that were sent to the department this week, which Michelle has provided response to. The first new question is actually related to bonfire. I think that you have covered that, Michelle. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We do have one additional thing I didn't mention earlier, which is, we are under our renewal for the next 12-month period, and we're adding an intake and processing module, which will even more information and management of that, like monitoring and tracking all requests for RFPs. So that's planned to go live in April.
Okay, so this is we're going to be entering our second year with use of Bonfire. And the department had a year to consider that program, whether it was worthwhile, and the decision is made to continue with it, and not just continue with it as it existed, but add some additional service layers to it. Is that right?
Yeah, just at this point, it's just one additional module, but yes.
Okay.
And then, I did add some additional information just related to how, we've had to be very, very I don't want to say the word flexible, but it's the only one that's coming to mind, but very flexible and very quick to, respond to some of the needs that have come up throughout the department to respond to COVID-19. And as every single, person on this call can sit down and say, that has been our life for the last 12 months. So we've had to do, like, the unit has done a lot of direct sourcing of PPE and sanitation supplies and critical needs waivers when necessary, just to get some services, related to the public health response, and then expediting contracts and MOUs and other types of documents where necessary. It's not necessarily a process improvement, but at the same time, it has shown how critical it is to have a very responsive and very, routine way to approach your contracts. And so the unit centrally, and then of course the units out in every division, have really just done everything they can to keep things going to help with that response.
Thank you. Are we within a window of opportunity right now, Michelle, where if some of our committee members here have suggestions of others, other aspects of Bonfire that might help with the contracting process, that they might be able to contribute to that, to those suggestions, so that we don't have to wait yet another year, to implement? What I mean by that is, it seems that there's been a request to add a couple, to add some things to the contract with Bonfire. Is there a time now where, if there's some other integral service that might help our providers, that they could make a request that program also cover it? Does that question make any sense to you? I'm sorry if I'm not articulate. It's been a long Zoom day.
Yep, it has. What I can say is that I do think the new module came at low or no cost. So that's one reason we were able to just jump on this opportunity. However, we are open to hearing, additional suggestions, realizing like this is one of the lifelines of the department in all sorts of ways.
I guess it would probably help too if we knew the capabilities of what it was able to do. I mean, we can have pipe dreams, but if the software doesn't have the abilities, I'm sure it has more, and I'm sure there are add-ons to what your existing license has or existing capabilities are. But that's one of the reasons why we're here. If you need our help to recommend that you have the ability to add more to it to make the contracts, the procurement and contracts division more seamless, then we certainly want to know what it's capable of and how it would help, and if that, what that investment looks like.
I would have to, for the answer about the capabilities, what I can do is make sure that the committee has the link to what's up on the website. It is not something I can do with the Zoom window up. I'm just not that good. But I can do that. And then also, share some information about what Bonfire is capable of doing, and get that from our contracts manager.
Okay, the last question, I think, on our new question relates to the $15 minimum wage potential that Delaware may be working with. But I think it relates to that overall it relates to potential legislation on that, but I think it also relates to the fact that, independent of any legislation, what is the department doing to increase that, what service providers are paid in terms of their hourly wage? What is the state doing? What is the department doing to look at look at wages? So if you could respond to that.
So anything related to funding is a much larger conversation that I would certainly have to have additional input from throughout our providers and no, our partners throughout the state. But when it comes to wages, it is a really tough nexus because the department will contract for a rate. One of the main inputs into those rates are wages. I'm not saying anything that anybody on this line doesn't already know, but it's a very significant nuance because that rate also covers certain things like an indirect or an administrative, and so like that whole complicated the mathematics really we are looking at that through the rate methodology study. We did have some information available for comment earlier this month. It actually is all up on our website, and that's another link that I can share. Actually, that one I could probably share pretty quickly, but and we even do have the video now from the February 3rd meeting. It's up on our website. So, we are looking at that because ultimately when it comes down to looking at how and what providers are paid, it is a question of what is uniform, what is transparent, and to be able to look at a question like this and say, hey, how is DHSS approaching it? And ultimately, this is something that, as legislation comes up, we realize that this legislation will impact a number of our providers across many, many different fields. And it's something that, we certainly are very much aware and have had, are having discussions with all the partners involved.
Carolyn, anything further on that?
I mean, it is obviously an ongoing discussion amongst the providers. The rate, I know from our perspective, the rate methodology roadmap is, a great tool to lay out what work is necessary to really understand the cost of providing services. But as it relates to this question, I think it's such a slippery slope to start having this conversation. But as it relates, just to focus on this question, I think that the point of the question, and then again, this is a conversation we can have when we get to the recommendations that we will ultimately put forward, is it's going to take the department however long it takes the department to get through all those rate studies, but they're never going to end because they're always going to need to be updated, knowing that data is forthcoming and through the work of Burns and Associates and HMA. I think that the gist of our request or our recommendation or suggestion for forethought is to start don't wait until you have all those rate studies done. It's going to be more money. You're going to need more money. So being proactive in how the department plans to have those conversations with this administration or the next administration, because the services are always going to be needed, to keep that, to keep the rates, to keep ultimately the part that is the wages part as opposed to the administrative, because it's all a formula, right? But it's still part of that is a very specific amount that the state reimburses for wages, and to keep that at a competitive level with the rest of the state, that having the department start thinking about what your actual operationalization plan is to stay ahead of that, versus we know the money has to follow, right? That's a different story, but knowing what you need to do and what systems you need to put in place to make sure that you're not, dog paddling to keep up, but that you're ready when it hits. I think is more the purpose of the, we know the funding issue, but the purpose of that question is to have the department really think of it proactively as opposed to reactively. But again, it's my 108th call today. So if any of the other committee members want to jump in, go ahead.
You know, I'll jump in. I think to summarize, Carolyn, kind of what you're saying and what the point of the question is, that the rate methodology study is a great plan. It's a great path. It outlines very specifically orderly steps that unfortunately will not keep pace with the implementation of any change in the minimum wage. If that goes through this year, it literally starts implementing within the next year. That impact is immediate. So that impact on providers is immediate, and that needs to be anticipated and addressed by the department, so that the providers that we represent will be able to still keep up. And it's already a struggle to keep up. So we're kind of going in the wrong direction. If the legislators move on that minimum wage, which, we all know the conversation on that is likely, we can't wait for the perfect pathway forward in that rate methodology study. It's great that we have it, but there needs to be an interim solution for providers as that wage goes up.
I think also, I know our rate study was done in 2018 for IDD. And I believe that nurses' rate study is completed now also, Carolyn, and purchase of care is being done now. And as Pam said and Carolyn said, we have a rate study that's 3 years old already, and it hasn't been implemented. So the issue becomes, at what point do you operationalize the rate studies that you have, and then back end what needs to come in if purchase of care hasn't been done yet, and then move forward. So, the department does have a large task, but we really need to look at what we have now, look at what we had in the past, and then plan forward 5 years. How do we catch everybody up at that point? Because if not, I know in IDD, we are so far behind. Carol and I and Elizabeth have been not lucky enough to be talking to a lot of legislators. So it's, what we're trying to explain is we're always trying to catch up. And to be very honest, as a provider, my biggest fear is, what is the plan that the department has to not only catch up, but in the future, where we're going? And I think that is probably a separate conversation from contracts. But if we've raised the point here, that's the mess of funding that we're in right now. So.
Well, Eugene, I think it does kind of connect with the contracts in that when we're talking about something like that indirect rate, right? That overhead, the inconsistency that some agencies are already absorbing at a 0% overhead, right? Versus a 15% overhead. So that's already in place. That's already part of this discussion, that inconsistency. And then on top of that, we cannot look myopically without looking at what's going to happen with that wage. There's no way to avoid funneling that in as we're talking about contracts. It's really all part of it. But
you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And we also provide services in New Jersey. And just looking at that, we actually started this work in New Jersey 6 years ago, because we knew minimum wage was going to go up. And we've worked it up. We've worked where every year there's more and more money coming. Personally, I would like to see that happening in Delaware. There's a plan. This is what we're doing. There is comfort in that for everyone, for the department, for vendors, and more importantly, for the people that we provide services to and their families, because it has become, I know in our industry, a point of panic. But Pam, you're absolutely right. It is all connected.
All excellent points. Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of the questions for now, and we move, Carolyn, is that right, to our next agenda item, which is our recommendations. Carolyn, how do you want to proceed on that?
Well, I mean, we have still a lot of information to review and we still have information to receive. We have another half hour we can go to, so I don't want to waste our time. Like, I don't want to give up that time. There's certainly things that have already risen to the top, making sure that the bonfire is working and, can do everything it can possibly do. I'm sure that's, one of the top things. Overhead seems to be, standardizing overhead is going to be definitely one of our top contenders. Barring further review of the information we have and the stuff that we're waiting for, if anybody has, something focusing on, what we've already talked about, or what, information we've already seen in conversations we already have, I think we can at least start beginning those conversations, knowing that there's going to be more coming down the pike. I am afraid that I think I know the other subcommittees have like 3 or 4 recommendations. That's going to be, I think, our biggest challenge, is narrowing it down to a reasonable list. But I'll open up to you guys. We're spent. It's Friday.
So I know there's a lot of areas that we've covered and probably plan on covering when it comes to contracts, procurement, et cetera. One of the things that I have run into recently, and I know it's affected at least one other agency. Right now, because of the way that when the contracts were originally developed, which has been over 5 years ago, the DSAM has been giving us 6-month extensions on those contracts every 6 months. Well, now it's mid-February and I don't have a contract since the end of the year. And I know other agencies and even some folks on this meeting have expressed the same concerns. They start the new year, new fiscal year, and they haven't received their contract, and they're just going on faith that it'll show up. But I've been active for 4 months on getting my contracts, and I've struggled. And I think that really plays into really all the stuff we've been talking about. And is it too much? Are there too many contracts? Are there not enough people managing the process? And I think I'd like to see if anyone else is having that concern as well, and if we should add that to our list.
I think that's a capacity issue in the department, or in the procurement and contracting department. Or does it boil down to that it's not standardized? Because I don't think that's necessarily, and I guess I'd look to Sarah and Kirsten, that are certainly out of the DSAM world, and in different divisions, if that's an issue across divisions or just in 1 or 2 divisions. Because if that is the case, then the conversation about recommendations should be standardizing it or leveling out the divisions in some way, so they have the capacity to stay within meeting procurement standards.
I'll weigh in. I would tell you it's not standard across divisions. We do a lot of work with the kids department, and those contracts tend to be, we get them in advance. There's not a lot of like room to negotiate or make changes to the contract. It's sort of like, if you want to do this contract quickly, here's your contract, so sign this contract. But we get them in time to have a new contract at the start of the year. And we have had some issues with DPH where we're on like all kinds of weird, different kind of stub years and fiscal years. And sometimes we're on track and sometimes we're not. I think it's a real mixed bag. I mean, I think everyone's running their own, individual procurement operation, and what it looks like is not standard across divisions or departments.
I agree with, this is Sarah. I agree with Kirsten. We're not having that particular issue. We just have more of the, kind of various grant periods and grant year issue. Nothing significant though.
Hi, this is Lynn. We've contracted with a couple of different departments, and I would say the one that always concerns me the most and that I have to track the closest is the subs DSAM, and we've been emailing them on a regular as well, Andrew, and I've gotten all but one. What was my point? So I think some other factors play into that. I think some of the strategic planning in the divisions impacts some of these like amendments and then the time goes by, and we all wish the world would move faster than it can sometimes, and then they're not able to meet their own deadline, right? Like, in other words, they think they're going to RFP something mid-contract year, so they give you a 6-month contract and they think it's, they'll be ready to RFP it, and then you start the new set of 5 or whatever. So I don't know if that's a helpful part of what may be happening or not, but I've found that a couple of times.
Us too, Lynn.
Knowing how things work, it definitely feeds into how we're able to make recommendations. You can't fix something if you don't understand how it's really wrong. So so that's really helpful, I think. Does anybody else have anything? I don't want to drag that out, but I think that's a major, from a contracts committee standpoint, I think that's a significant issue. So that was helpful. Thank you. Okay, so is there something else that's bubbling to the top? We have 21 minutes left, but okay, I think we might be at our capacity, which is fine. So if anybody else doesn't have anything else, I think Representative Griffith, if you're okay with it, we can move on to public comments. Yeah, I remember this time.
Sounds great to me. Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay, so now we are going to open up the meeting for public comment. I do not believe we had anyone that signed up ahead of time to speak, and in the attendees, I'm not seeing anyone, but at this time, if you would like to provide public comment, please raise your hand. Okay, I do not see any hands raised, so that will conclude the public comment period.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Do we have another meeting scheduled,
Oh
Carolyn?
no, God, see.
I retract.
There's always something
I
I forget.
retract my motion.
It was never
No.
seconded.
we I'm sorry. So we're expecting, per Michelle's estimation, we're expecting the rest of the information on March 1st. I think obviously we're going to need time to review and then have a conversation about it. Krista, do you anticipate the 5th would be one? Actually, the 5th is not 3 weeks. The 5th is 2 weeks. So the 12th is technically 3 weeks, and I have a 1:30. 12:30. I have a 12:30.
It's what their day's wide open, so whatever
Your day's wide open? Okay. I think we could do if
We
we want
do
to stick with the
11?
3-week timeline, we could do an 11 unless there's a major conflict. 11. Kirsten likes 11. Kirsten likes 11. Okay. I'm okay with that. So 11 o'clock on March 12th gives us almost at least 2 business weeks to review the remaining information, which we will make sure that you guys get as soon as we get it. And I highly encourage you to review what we did get today. And then the remaining information we get before we meet again, so that we are using your time to the best of our abilities.
And for the next meeting, I know this has happened across the board. This is a new issue with how meeting notices are sent out. Can I just see a share of hands of how many people had difficulty locating the meeting link for today? Okay, I know I did. So DTI is on the line. Could you let us know how our committee members how they will find that link, or maybe Alexa or Taylor, just so that the next meeting people know how to access it quickly without having to look around in various folders. And could you help us with that so we're able to get in more easily next time? Taylor, sorry, I'm going to ask you, do you know, or here's DTI, here we go.
Sorry, could you repeat that? Yes, so yes. So it appears when I
Can it
received
go out as a calendar invite instead of an email?
DTI, could you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure about the logistics on
I
that.
can jump in on that. I apologize for the delay. It's an individual panelist link that's sent to you. So it cannot be added to the calendar invite because it's individual to your specific email address. If there is an issue before, like I again, happy to have it resent and maybe a little earlier in advance. Yeah, anything we can do to make sure that gets to you will be great. We can do.
You know, we can always, I can always talk with DTI offline about any sort of, technological error that may have occurred that, we can discuss for the next meeting.
And being on other committees, I've had this experience already with this individual link, and sometimes it I guess just from a practical standpoint, because I have familiarity with this happening on another committee I serve on, it took me a little bit longer. I gave myself a little extra time to locate it and had to find it in another, folder. So, and I think there's a security reason behind it. Again, it's a unique link for you as a committee panelist to have. So it's different than your ordinary Zooms, which just have those passwords. And I think that's a security issue, which I think we all can take some comfort with. And I think I see Lynn's hand up.
Sorry, that was in reference to difficulty getting the finding it, but I needed to know what to search my email for, and when they gave that to me, I found it right away.
Okay. Thank you, Alexa, Taylor, and DTI for that helpful information. All right, Carolyn, I'm done talking for today.
Okay. I think let's go back and reinstate Kirsten.
I'll re-motion to adjourn.
Okay, re-motion to second.
That
Okay, many approvals of a re-motioning second. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. I thank you all yet again for your time and attention and energy. Thank you, Michelle, for your help in getting us that information, coordinating it. Everybody have a good weekend. This is a weird day, it seems, for everybody. So go and hopefully have a nice early start to the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
bye.